So, I guess few more people will be joining in a couple of minutes, but
few people are there in the waiting room probably.
Oh, waiting room. I thought no, I have disabled the waiting room, but let's see. Oh, two people are in the waiting room still. Maybe just when. Yeah, so couple of more minutes, but in between, any comment, or suggestion or question?
Regarding last, like, I said that like when we say when a complex number exists in 2 dimension but not in 3 dimension, again in 4 dimension we've gotten here. Which property of the complex field are we caring about? Like it should be a vector space in 2 dimension which has some multiplication operator that makes it a field. Is that property we are talking about, that such a field exists in 2D but not in 3D, but again in 4D but not in 5D or something?
No. Let us take this discussion separately. Just the two of us can talk. Others, it might just confuse unnecessarily. Okay.
Okay, sir.
But main thing about complex numbers that it is used is that it's a field, firstly. Okay. And a critical property of complex field is, which is not shared on real number field, is that every nth degree polynomial has n roots.
Yes.
Nth degree polynomial equation equal to 0 has a n roots. In real numbers, of course, it doesn't hold. 1 plus x square equal to 0 doesn't have any root in real numbers.
Yes.
So that has a whole lot of implications, and quaternions, I have not really studied them at all. So other than that they exist, why they use, why, what, I have no clue. Okay, but
okay.
So you can feel free to ask any question. If I say at best like this, I can say we'll talk it separately.
Okay.
So Bijan, just send me an email separately so that we can fix up a time and talk. Okay. I might forget the name. That's why I said you send the email rather than me.
I was actually, I sent you on WhatsApp actually. Okay, I will send you again on.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. So okay, so it's nearly 5 minutes, so I might as well start. So last session we had started talking about what is called extended real number system, or R bar, and how does one write limits and so on and so forth. So we'll recall that. Yeah. Okay. So R bar is written as, in R you add these 2 points, minus infinity and infinity. Okay. And the infinity plus a is written as infinity, and minus infinity plus a is written as minus infinity for all a in R. So we are now extending our addition thing for R bar, but infinity minus infinity is not defined. Perhaps I should have added, I will add when I send it to you, that infinity plus infinity and minus infinity is also defined. They are both equal to infinity minus infinity respectively. Infinity plus infinity is equal to infinity. Minus infinity is also minus infinity. But infinity minus infinity is not defined. Okay. And the reason is very clear. You can write down these rules from real numbers. If an converges to infinity, an plus a will also converge to infinity. If an converges to minus infinity, an plus a will also converge to minus infinity. The problem will occur if an is going to infinity, bn is also going to infinity, then an minus bn. You can have all examples, all kinds of things will happen. You can't, even if you define it as some given value, it may not be valid in most examples. So therefore, it is best not defined. Okay. Then, for a function on real to real, we had talked about limit of the function fx as x tends to infinity. We say that it is alpha if given alpha, there exists x naught such that x bigger than x naught gives you fx minus alpha is less than epsilon. So in general, what we get is if so if limit of fx as x tends to a, then we'll get that there is epsilon, no, delta here. Okay. There exists a delta such that x belonging to a minus delta to a plus delta implies fx minus epsilon alpha is less than epsilon. So when x is close to a, then this happens, and x is close to a is x is in a neighborhood of a. You pick up a neighborhood such that if x is in that neighborhood, this happens. And then this or any x naught real number, this we can call a neighborhood of infinity, and then extend the definition. Okay. We had spent time last class, but yeah, for a x in R, the set x minus delta 1 to x plus delta 2 is called a neighborhood of x for any delta 1 positive, any delta 2 positive. Likewise, the set x0 to infinity is called neighborhood of infinity for any x0. And minus infinity to y0 is called a neighborhood of minus infinity for any y0. So here is the interesting way of defining limits. Okay, with this terminology, we can define, suppose you have a g from R to R for alpha beta in R bar. Okay. We say that limit x goes to alpha, fx equal to beta, if given every neighborhood E of beta, there exists a neighborhood f of alpha such that x belongs to f implies fx belongs to E. So this agrees with the definitions we have given earlier for alpha beta in R, as well as for alpha in R bar and beta in R. But now we are also extending beta to be also in R bar. So it starts making sense for us to write what is limit as x goes to infinity, x by 1 plus x square. You would have all done it in school, class 12, etc., and you could know the answer equal to 1 or 0. As x increases, what will be the answer? It will be 0. It keeps becoming smaller and smaller as x becomes large. Okay. But now we have given a meaning to this. In the same vein, we can say x going to infinity, x square by 1 plus x is infinity. Hmm. In this, I'm thinking of as x positive. So the function 1 by x is defined on 0 to infinity, open at 0. And then we are looking at the limit as x goes to 0 of that. Okay. So then that is infinity. So it simplifies lots of calculations and writing, as you will see later. Okay. So and sometimes we can write the proofs for the two cases separately. We want to take x going to alpha, so we can take alpha equal to infinity and alpha in the real number system. And we can write down epsilon delta for one and neighborhood version for the infinite, or you can combine the two. All this is possible. Any question?
Yes, sir. I think it should be x element of f minus alpha.
Sorry, once a minute. Which one?
So, like for the definition of limit over here, like I think it should be x element of f minus alpha, like because alpha is not considered in the like limit usually.
No, firstly, which sentence are you saying?
So the like if given a neighborhood of e of beta, there exists a neighborhood f of alpha such that x element of f. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yes, sir. Over there, like I think like it should be f minus alpha instead of f, like in the like last line of that, like x element of f minus alpha.
Yeah. Yeah. So all my examples, my alpha was not in the domain, but if it is in the domain, you are right. So should write here. Yeah. So in fact, there is a terminology used by some authors, not everywhere. So if you take a neighborhood and delete the point of whose neighborhood you are taking, that is called deleted neighborhood. And even here, if alpha is in the domain, whether or not alpha is to be included or not also differs from author to author. So for some, writing this includes alpha, and for some, if alpha is in the domain, of course, and for some it doesn't. So
Yes, sir.
yeah, so then when writes x going to alpha, x not equal to alpha, if one wants to be very precise. Yeah. And whenever one writes something like 1 over x, etc., it is kind of understood that you are talking of a domain on which this function is defined. Though, if I ask in an exam, certainly I must specify it carefully. Okay. Not leave it for for you to guess what it is, but okay. So this bringing in infinite limits and limit could be infinity or limit as x goes to infinity. Both these are useful things. And in any case, these things are used in physics a lot. So even if we don't use it, they will continue to use it. They meaning in physicists. So it's better to come as close as possible. Okay. All right. So this terminology you get fixed up. If you have any difficulties, write to me or ask me next class. All right. So now we had done what we had called the mean value theorem. Now here is a generalized mean value theorem. And it might appear that we are doing it just for the heck of generalization, but you will see its usefulness soon. So firstly, the statement. F and G are real valued continuous functions. And F and G are differentiable on the open interval. So they are continuous functions on the closed interval, differentiable on the open interval. Okay. Then there exists a C in A to B such that, open interval A to B such that increment of F over the interval A to B minus G dash C is increment of G over the same interval times F dash C. And if all the things inside are non-zero and we take this on the here in the division side and take division. So we'll get FB minus FA divided by GB minus GA is equal to F dash C divided by G dash C. If G dash C is not zero and GB minus GA are not zero. So that's something which gives you more sense. And as it is stated, it doesn't tell you what it is saying, but effectively that the ratio of increments from A to B equals ratio of derivatives at some intermediate point. Provided these ratios are being constructed so that the denominators are non-zero. Whereas in this example, in this statement, we don't care something is zero or not zero, we can always do it. The expression makes sense. Okay. And why generalize? Well, you take the function g of x is equal to x. Then GB minus GA will be B minus A, and G dash at C at any intermediate point is 1.
So you get the old mean value.
Yeah. Okay. So that's why generalized mean value theorem. All right. So in many cases, what has happened is that you basically define a new function and for that apply the old result. And so that's what we do. So for t in A to B, let us define h of t to be the difference of the this where c is replaced by a time point t for any t. So fb minus fa gt minus gb minus ga ft. Okay. Let's call that ht. Now a and b are fixed, so it is just a linear combination of two continuous functions, which are both of which are differentiable. So the sum is continuous and is also differentiable on the same interval on which f and g are differentiable. So that is open AB. Okay. So sum of two continuous functions is continuous, sum of two differentiable functions is differentiable on the appropriate domains. So from there we get this. Now, so the definition of H I have rewritten here so that we make sense of what is we are doing now. So this is our H.
Yeah. So just question, differentiable on A comma B closed, doesn't that imply that continuity on A comma B itself?
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry, sir.
It implies continuity, but we are asking more differentiability on the open interval.
Yes. And continuity on the closed interval. So
Continuity on the closed interval. So yeah. So I've rewritten the definition of H again at the top of the page, and we see that now let us evaluate what is H of A. H of A, so this becomes GA. This is FA. And this FA GA here and GA FA here will get yeah. So here FAGA will be with a negative sign. Here FAGA will be with a double negative, which means positive sign. And therefore the sum will get cancelled. And therefore what is left is this one will be FBGA and minus FAGB. Clear?
Okay, sir.
Now, let us look at G at B. So now, this will be GB, FB. This time, FBGB here and GBFB here. FBGB is a positive sign, FBGB here is negative sign, so they cancel. And now we get FBGA with a negative sign as before, and FBGA positive sign here. So this, whoever has constructed this proof, I didn't cook it up, I just looked up some other book to get the proof, okay? So this definition of H helps us to get that we have constructed this H in such a way that HA equal to HB. Therefore, by Rolle's theorem, there is a C such that H dash C is 0. Now, what is H dash of T? H derivative of this. FB minus FA is a constant, so that stays as it is. GT becomes G dash C. This becomes as it is, ft becomes f dash c. So at c, h dash c is 0 will give you that these two quantities equal. H dash t is this, and therefore, if h dash at c is 0, we will get the what is on the last line. So, in maths, often one sees there are some proofs which are intuitive, where you can see that why it flowed this way, why some choices were made in a certain way, and perhaps one can even presume that if you think long enough and you have all the background, you may be able to come up with that proof. This doesn't fall under that category. You may come up with a more complicated proof, doesn't matter, but this particular construction is something which is just hindsight. Somebody did it and showed it works very well quickly, and so we use it. It falls in that category. Okay. All right. So, so let's stare at the statement once again. Yeah. And as I explained, useful case of this is especially GB minus GA when it is not 0, then it will also tell you that if f dash c is 0, other side can be 0, but if right hand side both are non-zero, then the left hand side also they should be non-zeros, etc. etc. So this is a useful case. Okay. All right. Mean value theorem is one important result on derivatives. This other one is also extremely important, and the different books list the author's name or the name of the mathematician with the S or without S. I don't know, Hopital rule is the pronunciation, but some write it with SP and some without S. Okay. And one small remark not related to our coursework, but often one finds that, especially when you read Wikipedia, it will say the Hopital rule and it will say, actually it is not due to Hopital. Hopital read it from so and so, but it is named after him. So there is a whole lot of, not necessarily, in some cases even a controversy, and some cases not a controversy, but just that it has become common that it is used by, it is attributed to someone who had not actually invented it. That person may have written about it. He read it from someone, but that writing was not that well understood by others or not well recorded, not well attended by others. There are many, many examples. For example, all of you would have used Stirling's formula for approximation of factorial number in your class 12. Factorial n is equal to e power whatever. But apparently it was several years earlier by De Moivre. Okay, let's see. Oh, you've never used Stirling's approximation. I'm surprised. Factorial n equal to e power, I forget the expression, sum of.
Root over 2 pi and n by e whole power n square.
Yeah. Oh, I see. So these are, I guess, depends on the board of for which your class 12 was there. And certainly those of you who have not seen it, you have not written the IIT entrance for sure.
No, sir, Stirling approximation was neither needed in JEE or board's exam. So
It was never not needed in JEE.
Yes,
No.
sir,
No,
not
sir, it
at
wasn't.
all actually. I mean, it may have been useful in some cases, but like it wasn't part of the syllabus and any problem could be solved without.
Okay. Since I myself never wrote JEE, and anyway, JEE has changed over the years, but okay. All right. So I was wrong that I assumed that JEE makes you do so many computations that this will be one of them, but okay. How is it an approximation if it needs e power roots and pi's?
I was saying Bijayan said such a complicated formula. It would
No,
be
no, no.
easier to use the factor.
It's not a question of complicated or otherwise. If you already know roots as well as pi and you are using it left and right, and now you want to estimate something about factorial n, it's extremely useful, let me tell you. Okay.
it looks nice in big or little notation. So it's n power n plus half or something like that. So by e power n. I forget that e power n every time.
So for example, you will see in your probability theory course, depends on who teaches it, it is used quite a bit. In computing limits of things where factorials are involved, this comes in very useful. Because e power a number is easier to deal with than factorial of that number. That's the point. Okay. Anyway. So, of course, there is a whole lot of controversy about who introduced calculus, derivatives, Newton or Leibniz, right? But let's leave the. So once I happened to be walking with two big-time mathematicians. They were both probabilists, but very well known as mathematicians in their own right. And one of them was constantly saying that, you know, this naming theorems after somebody's name is not good, as if it belongs to, it is owned by that person. And the other gentleman was saying that, no. If not anything else, it is useful because if you simply say, for example, L'Hopital rule, if you have read it, you know what you are talking about. Otherwise, each time you want to talk to each other, you have to write down the whole statement. So they kept on arguing. And of course, both of them had results named after them. So it was not like they were saying it because they never got that reward. Yeah. This was Paul-André Meyer, he passed away, a big probabilist, and Dinkin, who was a mathematician as well as a probabilist. You will, whatever you study later in BMath or BSc, you are likely to at least hear the name of Dinkin. Meyer's name will come only if you are doing something related with probability. Okay. So back to this L'Hopital rule. Okay. So, okay, at least those who wrote JEE would have seen this for sure, right? Or no?
Yes, sir, it
Yes,
was
sir,
there
we
also.
have
Yes.
seen.
Because it's a very useful computational tool. Fx, gx, they're so complicated, you can't figure out what is happening as they convert x goes to b. To differentiate the two, in some cases, it works. Okay. All right. So, if f and g are differentiable functions on open interval a to b, a, b in R, and if g dash is 0 for all x in a to b, not equal to 0, so that you can basically divide. Okay. Then if limit of fx and gx is 0 as x goes to b, then limit of fx by gx as x goes to b is also alpha. It is same as limit of f dash x by x dash, f dash by g dash. Okay. Just to carefully bring out what is assumptions and what is conclusion, I have written it in this style, but books could write limit x going to be fx by gx equal to limit x going to be f dash x by g dash x, which is not wrong, but the second limit is assumed to exist and then the first one also exists and so on and so forth. So
Sir,
yeah,
just for a second, can you take the proof of the generalized linear theorem just to see the function that was defined h of x?
let me go to the statement part. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay.
These are assumptions and this is the conclusion. Okay. And the result is true in their far more generality. Okay. And if you see Rudin's book, all cases are nicely bunched into one statement and one proof. But for learning, it is better to do it in steps. Okay. For example, we can allow alpha to be infinity or minus infinity. We can allow A and B to be infinity or minus infinity. All these things are there. Okay. But best is if we do it, first let's understand the proof where A, B are real numbers, alpha is a real number, and so on. Okay. There's a version of this which is also true if g dash x goes to infinity rather than f dash by g dash being equal to having a limit. All kinds of things are there. Anyway, we'll see it later. So for now, alpha is a real number, AB are real numbers, and we are looking at this. All right. So we have that f dash by g dash converges to alpha as x goes to c. That is our x goes to b. That is our assumption. So now, given alpha, given epsilon, there exists a delta such that for x in such that b minus delta less than x less than b, we are already incorporating that b is an upper bound. So there is nothing b plus side. Okay. And equal to b is also not involved. So therefore, x less than b. One has f dash by g dash is between alpha minus epsilon to alpha plus epsilon. Now, note that if you take two quantities u and v between b minus delta and b and u like less than v, okay, then by the generalized mean value theorem which we just now did, increment of f divided by increment of g is equal to f dash at some intermediate point divided by g dash at some intermediate point. And we have just now chosen our delta in such a way that f dash x by g dash x is between alpha minus epsilon to alpha plus epsilon. So f dash c by g dash c is between alpha minus epsilon to alpha plus epsilon. Therefore, this ratio itself is close to alpha. It belongs to alpha minus epsilon to alpha plus epsilon. Now this is holding for all u and v with this property. Now what you do, you fix a u and take limit as v goes to b. Continuity will tell you that fv will go to f of b. G of v will go to g of b. Both of them are assumed to be 0. Limit of fb is 0, limit of gb is 0, gx is 0, fx is 0 as x goes to b. So, as you take u is fixed, you take a limit as v goes to b, and you will get that fu by gv, gu will also belong to this interval. I should have been a little more careful. Because each quantity is in this open interval, the limit will also be in that same interval, but it could jump to the boundary. It could go to the boundary. So, on a lighter note, suppose this was an exam problem, let's say having 10 points. And like I wrote open interval. So certainly 1 out of 10 marks will be deducted from the proof. There are some harsh examiners who might deduct 5 points, some might deduct 7 points, anything. They'll say, no, basics of calculus is missed out, or basics of convergence, etc. is missed out. So anyway. Okay. So we have therefore shown that given epsilon, there is a delta such that for all x with b minus delta bit less than x less than b, one has alpha minus epsilon less than equal to fu by f gu less than equal to alpha plus epsilon. And hence, we have proven that gx by gu, the ratio, the limit as x goes to b is also alpha. Once we have the generalized mean value theorem, the proof is almost very, very easy. Okay. The limit of the derivative tells you that you can get to a neighborhood of b minus delta to b, such that in that neighborhood, this ratio f dash by g dash is close to the required limit alpha. Then we use the generalized mean value theorem to get that you take any u and v here, the increment ratio is equal to is also in that interval, alpha minus epsilon to alpha plus epsilon. And then for a fixed u, you take the limit as v goes to b and conclude that fu by gu should also be in the same interval. So as you will see in many proofs, this sequence of choices or sequence of taking limit is extremely important. So here we have first note something which holds for every uv and then take the limit as v goes to an appropriate value. Okay. All right. So So I'm sure you might have done some examples in your whatever class 12 or certainly JEE, but suppose let's take this example. Fx is equal to x square plus x divided by sin x. And we are looking at x going to 0. Oh, I forgot to mention, I didn't read it out. The same thing is true with x going to be replaced by x goes to a. Same proof essentially. Okay. So you don't have to necessarily go to the upper end point. The same works with the lower end point. The statement will be if x goes to a, f dash x by g dash x is equal to alpha, limit x going to a, fx equal to limit x going to a, gx equal to b, then limit x going to a, fx by gx is also alpha. Okay. So same symmetric thing. Okay. Yeah.
The converse is also true, right? Like if fx by gx tends to alpha, then f prime x by gx tends to alpha. Actually, in that case,
Not that sure. Not sure.
Sir, that is true if f prime x over g of prime x exists, and then you have that fx, like, limit of fx by gx tends to alpha, I mean, is equal to alpha, and then it will also be equal to alpha, right? But if the limit does not exist,
Yeah, so there are problems
Then-
where one limit may not exist, other may exist, all kinds of things. So we'll need to write down precisely the statement to decide whether it is true or not. Okay.
okay, sir.
but in this one, because you've already said that the limit of the quotient of the derivatives actually exists and is alpha, you're guaranteed that
Yeah.
the limit of the okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, sir.
So if you want to write our if and only if statement, then we have to put down some more. I'm sure we'll need some more conditions in the framework. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So now if there was a statement in probability theory, I could, if something is not true, I can immediately construct counterexamples. Here, I may not be able to immediately construct a counterexample. I may need to think if the result is true or there is a counterexample. Okay. All right. Actually, I realized that this is the first time ever that I'm teaching a elementary analysis course to the first year students. I've taught first year students, but then I've taught probability theory, or I have taught cryptography as optional, but I have not taught analysis. So all these results, I know I have studied them ages ago now. And left and right. So some things I can recall proof, some things I can't recall proofs. I have to look at a book to write the proof. Okay, let's go to the example. Yeah.
Sure, like I found that like geometric reason, like for the previous generalized mean value theorem. So we are given that f of x and g of x are continuous and bounded. So h of t, like how you construct h of t is like first you take g of x, and then you have to you should take f of x and modify f of x such that the endpoints of f of x agree with the endpoints of g of x, and then you can the difference between the two functions h of t will be like the difference between the two functions, the modified f of x and the original g of x.
Okay.
And sole derivative will be 0 at some point.
I mean, no, why are you going to the difficult? I'm not saying difficulty, but if you are just asked to prove this theorem, okay, then you have to construct H with a suitable way. How does one think of that? That's the point. Okay.
Sir, I just googled it, and so like we'll just consider that fx as the x-axis and gy as the y-axis. Of course, that won't be a proper function, but that would look like if we consider some interval, sub-interval where it is acting as a function, then we can actually apply the Lagrange mean value theorem upon that, and then we get this H function from that.
Yeah. So you see, there are some proofs where the proof essentially you just think about it and you will cook up the same proof. Whereas there are some proof theorems where different people may have come up with the different proofs, and one of them survives because that gives you the shortest proof. Okay. So
Okay.
that's all I wanted to say. That
Okay.
it's not that this is unnatural or anything. There should be logic to get to this, but it is not immediate. Whereas some of the proofs, it is almost immediate what you should be doing. Yeah. Yeah, so hx equal to x square plus x divided by sine x. As x goes to 0, both numerator and denominator go to 0. Okay. And so to actually compute what the limit will be of hx, one can do it by differentiating both sides. Numerator, the derivative will be 2x plus 1. Denominator, the derivative is cosine x. And we see that this limit exists. So hx also goes to 1. So often these are the quickest way of proving that a limit of something where the numerator and denominator both are going to 0. Quickest way is this. And not just that, let's see. Let's take this function. You want to find the limit as x goes to 0. Now, what is u dash x? 5x plus 5x power 4, 9x square plus 2x. Well, not h dash x. Doing the numerator and denominator ratios I'm looking at. Still of not much use because even after differentiating, both are going to 0. What do? You differentiate once more. Hopefully it will, this may not be a right example. Denominator, the ratio there will be 1 will be 2 cos x plus 2 sin x sin square x. Yeah. So denominator will go to non-zero object, so that will do. So you look at second derivatives, that will converge. You compute the limit, then it will tell you that the first derivative ratio will converge to the same quantity, and from there you get that the original thing also converges to the same. You get my point, what I'm saying?
Yes.
My writing is so this can be extended to higher derivatives, is all I'm saying. Okay. So if we had that if the ratio of the second derivatives is alpha, and along with the first derivatives, along with the functions going to 0, you also have that their derivatives go to 0, first derivatives. The same conclusion is true. First, apply this result to get that the limit x goes to be f dash x by g dash x is alpha. Now apply this result and you will get limit of fx by jx is also alpha. Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, instead of functions, I mean, is this result even true if we consider instead of functions sequences, and instead of derivative we take differences?
No. It may not be true. Because difference and derivative have a very different meaning, you see.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me see if I can quickly come up with a counter example. May not be, but so
I don't know exactly, but even if we consider the difference, then it should like in some interval that should be satisfying that Cauchy, that generalized mean value theorem, something like that, from which we've derived this L'Hopital rule.
No, but that's only this proof. So when we are trying to generalize, we don't try to necessarily require that. So can you tell the question? What was so? What is it about? What he asked. Yeah, the question was that here the statement is about functions. Is this also true if we had instead of function we have a sequence, and instead of the derivative we replace it by difference? That was the question.
Sir.
Yeah.
There is, so I'm not sure if the conditions are exactly the same, but there is a very similar lemma for sequences called the Stoll-Cesaro lemma, which actually says what Shubham was asking, that you can replace the derivative with a difference and do the same thing for sequences.
Yeah,
the conditions are very similar, if not identical.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you tell the name of the lemma which you told?
Yeah, I'll type it in chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This proof I was writing just as our class time was coming close. And of course, I was doing cut and paste and then modify. So there may be an error. Don't be alarmed if you see an error. Okay. So as I mentioned, this theorem is true in much more generality, and I'm generally going stages. So now I take alpha to be infinity. A and B is still a finite interval. A and B both are finite, real values only, and everything else is the same except that alpha is replaced by infinity. If f dash by g dash is limit exists and is infinity, then limit x going to be fx by gx is also infinity. Okay. So just that part is changed, nothing else is changed. Other conditions are the same. Alpha is replaced by infinity. And let me tell it in words here and then we will go to the proof. Okay. So given epsilon, we said there is a delta So when it comes to infinite sets, when B is infinity, then B minus something will still be infinity. So there is no point. But we see that this is a B minus delta to B is a neighborhood of B as far as our interval A to B open is concerned. So this is replaced by there is a neighborhood of infinity. And what is the neighborhood of infinity? Any number to infinity. So there exists a delta if you replace by there exists a K such that for all this more or less that is the change of the proof needed. Okay. The mean value theorem is still needed only for bounded objects. We don't have mean value theorem when one of the intervals is infinity. At least we have not done it. There may be a version of that. We have not done it. But you see, we first take any two. Now here we will take u and v between k and infinity. Then we apply this. Since u and v are finite numbers, real values, this theorem holds. And fu by fv instead of belonging to alpha minus, no, this epsilon is as it is. No, alpha is our required thing, right? In explaining, I was getting confused. I made a wrong explanation. So we are replacing alpha to be infinity, but b is still a finite number. Yeah. So alpha minus delta, alpha minus epsilon to alpha plus epsilon was changed, and this delta remains as it is because b is still finite. Yeah. Given k finite, there exists a delta such that for all x, b minus delta less than x less than b. One has this. This is replaced by there is a k finite. There is a delta such that this happens, and this is replaced by k. Some quantity converging to infinity is same as from some point onward there is a k such that from then on it is closer to it is bigger than k. So that is what the proof is. So given a k, there is a delta such that for all x, such that b minus delta less than x less than b, one has k less than f dash by g dash. Because f dash by g dash is converging to infinity, so this works. It can be made arbitrarily large as your point x comes close to b. So that is what arbitrarily large is greater than some number k which has been assigned. Now you take u and v between b and b minus delta. So the mean value theorem, generalized mean value theorem gives us this, and f dash c by g dash c is already bigger than capital K because this c is in between u and v, so f dash c by g dash c is between k and infinity. Now you take limit as v goes to b, fv by gv will be 0. So we get that Fu by Gu is also belonging to K to infinity. So we have shown that given a where the 0 has come. This should be we have shown that given a K finite, there is a delta such that for all x between b minus delta less than x less than b, one has Fu by Gu is above K.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
It is saying that such that all x. So will that be u?
Yeah, that should be U. So, as you see, the changes are very cosmetic. And the entire, we can try to write the whole proof together by writing this notion of neighborhoods. And if you have access to Rudin's book, you go to the L'Hopital rule in Rudin, and you will see that what we did today and more, he does in just one shot. But I thought it is better to do it step by step. Okay. I'll start reading this, but I might find an error somewhere because this was the proof I was reworking. I copied the old proof and was changing. And then I suddenly saw that it was almost time. So I came over. So there may be errors in this one. Let's see. So the statement is correct. So version with AB also in R bar. So FG differentiable functions on open interval A to B with A less than B, AB are in R bar. So it allows 0 to infinity, minus infinity to infinity, minus infinity to 0, all these possibilities. Suppose G dash X is not 0 for all X, and there is alpha such that F dash by G dash is equal to alpha, and limit of Fx and Gx is 0. Maybe one can also take alpha to be in R bar also. Both at the same time one can do. Okay. Let me, since I know that there may be some errors, let me not go over what I have written already. I will work that out and then we'll do it next week when we meet. Okay. But these two parts that we did just now, you should be carefully follow that up and be comfortable with that. Okay. And as I mentioned, it just jumps up. This most general version of this is actually when AB in R and R bar and alpha is also in R bar. So other parts are the same. F dash by G dash is going to alpha. It could be infinity, minus infinity, whatever. And B can be plus infinity as well. Or A can be minus infinity, and we will work with A as well. So the ratio of the derivatives is alpha. Then the ratio of the functions itself is also alpha. That's the statement. And I will prepare properly this most general version. You can also see it in Rudin's book, and you can see how cryptic the writing is in a book. Okay. All right. Now let me look at the some of the questions people have put. Stolz-Cizarro theorem, okay, Toeplitz theorem, okay. Yeah, these are topics which I have never studied much. So, Toeplitz theorems, so I have not studied. When I was studying, my entire focus was on this continuum. Sequences or finite things, I did not pay much attention. It was all sequences, is just as a way of getting to the series. I was never going back. So therefore, your question I could not answer right away because my thinking has not been trained in that fashion.
I don't know if it is correct, but we can also like consider the sequence and then like interpolate with a differentiable function and then consider the sequence as a subsequence of that function. So if that function is going to that limit, then again that sequence is also all the subsequential limit converges to same limit.
No. You see, where you will go wrong is, so when you take a sequence and by interpolation you put it in the as a function, that continuity fine, but differentiability. Derivative from the right and derivative from the left may be difficult. You can somehow manage that, you can match them, but then various other things will need to be worked out.
No, for finite number of points, we can in fact like construct a polynomial that will be like n times differentiable.
Yeah, but we are interested in infinitely many, and then you want to have that whatever statements you're making about the original sequence also continues to work for the sequence that you have from the sequence to the function. And infinite sequence we want eventually as limit as n goes to infinity and so on and so forth. So it's not that easy as it sounds, all I'm saying. It can be done maybe in some cases. Okay. But may be difficult in some cases. So good to think on such matters, but so other thing I'm planning to do is to send some exercises, not assignment, but exercises. And let me stress again that the idea of an exercise is for you to think about them. So before we discuss them, I will mention a day on which I will discuss them in the session class. Before that, I expect that you should at least give it a thought. How do you solve it? Maybe if you can't, you then form a group, from a group of people you discuss, find, etc., etc. Because the important part is not just knowing the result. Important part is to train your mind how to look at a new problem and try to solve them in the same fashion. Okay, that is the important part. Okay. So, anything more? Time is up. Those who want to leave can leave, but any questions I'm here to answer or listen. Either way.
Sir, about the generalized mean value theorem, I sort of get how one could come up with a proof of the equation once the equation is formulated, but I didn't get how does one come up with conjecture such an equation?
Yes,
like
that is the most important part. See, so once you are given this, then you will know how to prove it. But how does one come up with such a function? Okay, and so that is what I'm saying is hindsight. You see,
so not the function exactly, but the equation which is like the statement of the theorem, the FB minus F8 times G dash C. Okay. That equation itself.
So my guess is that in some other more complicated proof, somebody needed this kind of a result. And then I mean, it may not be true, but with me, it has happened that in a very complicated thing, I use some you may say lemma, or you may say some intermediate step. And then one realizes that that intermediate step itself is valuable.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So often some of the things is unimaginable. Why somebody even thought of this? Okay. I think arises like that. But
So since it looks like mean value theorem, they simply called it generalized mean value theorem.
yeah, because by taking a special case, you will get the mean value theorem, right? You said gx equal to x, you get the mean value theorem. But these
That
are
makes sense,
guessworks.
Innocent.
These
Right.
are guessworks. We really don't know. And how old these things are, who really did it and who others. So as I mentioned a few names, what we know as somebody's name may actually have been discovered by someone else. Doesn't matter. So come back to my story. Mayer, this was a conversation in Calcutta when I just finished my PhD, and there was a conference for which both these big shots had come, Mayer and Dinkin. And Mayer had read about the Dakshineshwar temple. And he said that I know it is walking distance from ISI, so let's walk. I tried to persuade them that no, we have a car available from the institute. I'll take the car, we'll go. Those days for students to get hold of car was impossible, but for visitors, I was allowed to get hold of a car. But they insisted on walking. I told them walkable as far as distance is concerned, it is walkable, but the road itself is not walkable. It was much worse then than what it may be today. The road condition. I'm talking of 1982 beginning, so nearly 40 years ago. They insisted on walking, and while they were walking, somehow they came to this conversation with, and Mayer saying that it's unfortunate that theorems are named after mathematicians as if they own them. So Mayer has results named after him, and so does Dinkin. And I could kind of agree with both of them. With Mayer saying that, yeah, one should not call it somebody's theorem, and Dinkin saying that it's so easy to remember what it means if you quickly, the entire statement need not be stated once a theorem gets a name. Anyway. Yeah. So
just a point about that, you said that differentiability of function of the interpolating for infinitely many n. So I'm saying that for suppose capital N is a number of n we have interpolated using a polynomial, and after that n we don't know yet, we are constructing. So we again construct from capital N to something, and so within that, there we will have a polynomial, but the main concern is that those polynomials will have a point when they will be meeting, that meeting point should also be differentiable, right? So since the sequence has every sequence has a n, for every n there is n plus 1, so basically it is like there is a successor. That is not the case in real number. So there's a successor. Between two successors, we can have an some interval where we can actually modify those functions to make them differentiable when they are meeting. So that kind of thing we can do, and actually like construct an interpolation and make it a differentiable function that is passing through that infinitely many points.
Well, maybe. But
the only thing is we are getting to do this is because the integer sequence has a successor by Peano's axiom. So
yeah, but in any problem that one is going to apply, one will need something more than just differentiability. You have something in mind on that problem. So it may not be all that easy. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Maybe possible in some, may not be possible in some. For example, this one itself, if you try to write down a version for sequence and try to prove it, this one, L'Hopital rule, write down a statement of the sequence. Statement will be easy, but then try to write out a proof, you will discover some of the problems. If you can quickly do it easily, then it's fine. But
okay, sir. We will have to.
So in the case for sequences, actually, I think we need extra conditions. Like we need to assume that the sequence, the denominator is either increasing or decreasing past a point. I think something like that is also necessary. It doesn't directly like just translate from here.
probably. So actually, my own guess is that whole lot of mathematics developed because they needed to do something for a problem of interest. And in the process, they discovered a whole lot of things were used to do that problem. And then each of those intermediate steps could themselves be of interest and importance. And then they were given names, they were given defined definitions, and then used, and so on and so forth. So
Right, that makes sense, sir.
So,
Thank you, sir.
okay, all right. I said to Dakshineshwar walking, yes. So, yeah, it's you are you from Calcutta? You don't think it's a walking distance? Yeah, it's a walking distance, but in those days, the surrounding, oh, okay, so you don't consider it walking. So certainly you won't consider ISI to Shambazar as walking or ISI to Dharamtala or Esplanade as walking if you don't consider Dakshineshwar as walking. I don't consider them as walking, but some people do. So whether something is walking distance or not is a highly depends on, I won't call it how lazy one is, but I will just simply put it as each as their own view of how much is walkable and how much is not. So, okay. All right. I hope things improve and next Jan you all can be at CMI and we can meet in person. So remember, remind me, even if I don't teach a course to you, at least one evening we'll arrange so that we have I see you all and you see me, because that's a very important part. Assuming that you all are back in Jan, hopefully. All right. Bye.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.